The first thing I noticed when I walked into my childhood bedroom wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. The walls, once covered with framed jerseys, signed baseballs, and championship memorabilia, were now bare, except for faded rectangles where the frames had hung for 15 years. My stomach dropped, but my face remained calm. I'd learned that skill in my profession. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, cataloging what was missing. The Tony Gwynn signed jersey from his 3,000th hit game, gone. The LaDainian Tomlinson game-worn cleats from his record-breaking season, gone. The Drew Brees football from his first Chargers touchdown, gone. 24 years of careful collecting, authentication, and preservation, vanished. Mom? I called downstairs, keeping my voice level. Where's my collection? Her footsteps echoed up the stairs, casual and unhurried. She appeared in the doorway with that satisfied smile she wore when she thought she'd done something particularly clever. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, her floral blouse crisp and pressed. She looked like the picture of maternal innocence. Of that old stuff. She waved her hand dismissively, bangles jangling on her wrist. I donated it all to the Children's Hospital charity auction. They were so grateful. You should have seen how excited the coordinator got when I told her about all those signed things. I blinked slowly, processing her words. $40,000 worth of authenticated sports memorabilia, gone. Just like that. Handed over to strangers like it was old clothing. Without asking me first? Mom laughed, the sound sharp in the empty room. Honey, you're 32 years old. You're too old for toys. It was just collecting dust up here, and those sick children can benefit from it much more than you can. Having it sit in storage gathering cobwebs. Storage, she called my carefully curated collection storage. The same collection that insurance companies required climate-controlled environments to protect. The same collection that professional appraisers had valued at over $40,000. You're probably right, I said quietly, surprising her with my calm response. She'd clearly been expecting a fight, maybe even hoping for one. Her eyes narrowed slightly, confused by my measured tone. What she didn't know was that I'm a senior insurance adjuster specializing in high-value personal property claims. I've spent 12 years documenting, appraising, and investigating theft cases involving collectibles. I know exactly what constitutes theft, fraud, and illegal disposal of property, and I knew exactly what she'd just done. I'd started collecting when I was 8 years old. My first piece was a signed baseball from Tony Gwynn that Dad bought me at a Padres game for my birthday. I still remembered the weight of it in my small hands, the careful way Dad had shown me how to hold it without smudging the signature. This is special, Marcus, he'd said. Someday it'll be worth a lot of money, but more importantly, it'll always remind you of today. Over the next 24 years, I built one of the most comprehensive collections of authenticated San Diego sports memorabilia on the West Coast. Every piece told a story, marked a moment in local sports history that mattered to me. The collection wasn't random accumulation. It was a carefully planned archive of San Diego athletics. The jerseys alone represented decades of franchise history. I had game-worn pieces from the Chargers' AFC championship runs, including a powder blue jersey from the epic 1994 playoff season. There was a Padres uniform from the 1998 World Series run, complete with authentication from the team's equipment manager. Even a rare San Diego Rockets jersey from their brief ABA stint in the early 70s. But the real treasures were the game-used items. Cleats worn by LaDainian Tomlinson during his record-breaking 2006 season when he scored 31 touchdowns. A batting helmet used by Tony Gwynn during his pursuit of 400 in 1994. A basketball signed by the entire 2011 SDSU team that reached the Sweet 16. Each piece came with ironclad provenance, team letters, equipment manager statements, and third-party authentication from PSA, JSA, or Steiner Sports. More importantly, every single piece was listed on my homeowner's insurance policy as a scheduled item with individual appraisals. The insurance company required detailed documentation for anything over $500 in value, photographs from multiple angles, authentication certificates, purchase receipts, storage condition reports, security measures. Everything was meticulously documented and filed. I'd moved back home 6 months ago to help Dad recover from his triple bypass surgery. The doctors said the recovery would take at least 8 months, and Mom seemed overwhelmed by the medication schedules, physical therapy appointments, and dietary restrictions. When I offered to take a leave of absence from my job to help, she'd been genuinely grateful. "It would mean so much to have you here," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to handle all this medical stuff, and your father won't listen to me about his medications." She'd insisted I stay in my old room, saying it would be just like old times and that having my things around would make the house feel more like home again. I'd been touched by the sentiment. Now I understood the real reason she'd wanted me in that specific room. The moving process had been careful and deliberate. Each piece of my collection was packed in archival materials, transported in climate-controlled vehicles, and immediately placed in protective display cases I'd had custom built for the room. The humidity was monitored daily. The temperature never varied more than 2 degrees. UV protective glass covered every frame. Professional conservators would have approved of the setup. For 6 months, I managed Dad's recovery while working remotely for the insurance company. I coordinated with doctors, managed medications, filed health insurance claims, and gradually helped him regain his strength. I also took over most of the household finances when it became clear that medical bills were straining their budget. The mortgage payment, utilities, groceries, Dad's medications that insurance didn't cover. I quietly handled it all. Mom had seemed grateful for the help, especially when I used my industry connections to negotiate better rates on Dad's supplemental insurance. She praised my financial expertise to friends and neighbors, boasting about her son who worked for the insurance company and knew how to handle everything. Now I understood why she'd been so eager to have me back in this specific room, with all my valuable belongings conveniently displayed. "Which charity auction?" I asked, pulling out my phone and opening the voice memo app. In my line of work, documentation is everything. "The Children's Hospital. They have that big gala next month." She beamed like she just solved world hunger. "I told them all about your collection, and they were so excited. Apparently, sports memorabilia brings in excellent money at these fancy events. The coordinator said they might make the cover of the auction catalog." "I'm sure it does." I nodded, already mentally calculating the likely auction values. A Gwyn signed jersey could easily bring $8,000 to $10,000 at a charity auction. The Tomlinson cleats, probably $5,000 to $7,000. "Do you have the donation receipt?" Of course, she produced a folded paper from her pocket with a flourish, like a magician revealing the final trick. "Tax deductible too. You should thank me for thinking of your taxes." I examined the receipt carefully, photographing both sides with my phone. According to the document, she donated miscellaneous sports items, including clothing and toys, valued at $500. $500 for a collection I had professionally appraised at $41,300 just 2 years ago for insurance purposes. "This valuation seems low," I said mildly, keeping my voice neutral. Mom shrugged, her bangles jangling again. "I'm not an expert on that kind of thing. I just estimated what seemed reasonable for old sports stuff. It's not like they were antiques or anything valuable." No, she wasn't an expert, but I was. I'd spent years learning authentication methods, market values, and conservation techniques. I'd taken courses in sports memorabilia appraisal. I testified in court cases involving forged signatures and fraudulent collectibles. I knew exactly how much everything was worth and exactly how much damage her casual handling had likely caused. "Did you tell them the items were yours to donate?" "Well, they were in my house." Her tone turned slightly defensive. "I've been storing them for years. In my room, that I'm currently living in, with my belongings that I moved back specifically to help with Dad's recovery." For the first time, her confidence wavered slightly. A small crack appeared in the satisfied expression. "You don't live here permanently, you're just visiting while your father recovers. It's not like this is your real home anymore." "I see." I took photos of the receipt with my phone, making sure to capture the date, the donation organization, and the absurdly low valuation. "Well, I'm sure the charity will appreciate whatever they get for the items." Mom relaxed, apparently satisfied that I wasn't going to make a scene. "They will, and you'll feel good knowing you helped sick children. That's what really matters here, not some old sports things. Think about all the medical equipment that money could buy. I would have felt wonderful about helping sick children if I'd been asked first, if the donation had actually been mine to give, if it had been a real gift rather than theft disguised as charity. After Mom went back downstairs, humming cheerfully as if she'd just completed a successful home organization project, I sat on my old bed and opened my laptop. The familiar insurance company portal felt like home after months of working remotely. I knew every form, every procedure, every requirement by heart. The first call I made was to my supervisor, Jessica Martinez. "Hi, Jessica. It's Marcus. I need to report a theft claim on my personal policy." "Oh no, what happened? Break-in?" "Someone donated my entire scheduled collectibles collection to charity without my permission while I was temporarily staying in their home." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear the familiar sounds of the claims department, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the coffee machine that never worked properly. "That's unusual. Was it family?" "My mother." Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus, you know I have to ask this. Are you sure you want to pursue this as theft rather than handle it as a family dispute? Sometimes these situations can be resolved without involving law enforcement." I looked around the empty room at the faded rectangles on the wall where my frames had hung. I thought about the signed Gwyn ball that had started it all, probably sitting in some storage room right now, vulnerable to temperature changes and humidity that could damage the signature permanently. "Jessica, in your professional opinion, if someone takes $41,000 worth of property belonging to someone else and disposes of it without permission, regardless of their claimed good intentions, what would you call that?" "Theft." "Then yes, I'm sure. I'll need the standard forms for high-value theft claims, and I'll need the contact information for our fraud investigation team. I'll email everything to you within the hour. Marcus, I'm sorry this happened, especially with family." "Thank you. Oh, and Jessica, I'll need to take personal leave to handle this properly. Family theft cases require careful documentation." "Of course. Take whatever time you need." The next call was to the Children's Hospital Development Office. "Development Office, this is Patricia speaking. How can I help you today?" "Hi, Patricia. I understand you recently received a donation of sports memorabilia for your upcoming auction from a Carol Chen." "Oh yes." Her voice brightened immediately. "Mrs. Chen brought in quite a collection yesterday. We're very grateful. Some of those pieces look like they could be significant fundraisers for us." "I'm sure they could be. I'm actually calling because there's been a serious misunderstanding. The items Mrs. Chen donated weren't hers to give." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "The sports memorabilia collection belongs to me. Mrs. Chen is my mother, and she donated my property without my knowledge or consent. She had no legal right to dispose of those items." "Oh my God," Patricia's voice went up an octave. "I had no idea. She seemed so. She brought documentation and everything. She talked about her son outgrowing his sports phase and wanting to help children." "What kind of documentation did she provide?" "A donation form listing the items and their estimated value. She said they belonged to her son, who had moved on to more adult interests. She seemed very knowledgeable about the pieces." I almost laughed. Knowledgeable. Mom couldn't tell the difference between a game-used jersey and a replica, but she presented herself as informed about my collection. "Patricia, I'm going to need to see that form and any other documentation she provided, and I'll need to discuss retrieving the items immediately." "Of course, absolutely. Mr. Chen, I am so sorry about this situation. We never would have accepted these donations if we'd known there was any question about ownership. This is highly irregular. I understand it's not your fault. You were deceived, just like I was robbed. Can I come in this afternoon?" "Yes, please. I'll pull all the documentation and have our legal team available if needed." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Patricia's office at the Children's Hospital, looking at the donation form my mother had filled out in her careful cursive handwriting. She'd listed herself as the sole owner of various sports collectibles, toys, and memorabilia belonging to son who has outgrown them, with a total estimated value of $500. The description was deliberately vague, designed to make the items sound like childhood toys rather than valuable collectibles. She'd even included a note: "Son is now focused on adult career and has no interest in sports items. Prefers they help children rather than collect dust." "The items are still here," Patricia assured me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "We haven't cataloged them for the auction yet. You can take them back immediately, of course. Actually, I'd like to see them first. I need to document their current condition for the insurance claim and police report." Patricia's eyes widened. Police report? What my mother did constitutes grand theft under California law. The insurance company requires a police report for any theft claim over $10,000. She led me to a storage room in the hospital's basement where 23 mismatched boxes sat on metal shelving. Grocery bags, Amazon shipping boxes, old moving containers, my entire collection, hastily packed into whatever containers my mother could find around the house. I opened the first box and had to suppress a gasp. My signed Tony Gwynn jersey from his 3,000th hit game was crumpled at the bottom like dirty laundry, the authentication certificate crinkled and torn beneath it. The jersey itself had creases that might be permanent, and the signature had smudged slightly from contact with the cardboard. The second box contained a signed football from Drew Brees, rolling loose with no protective casing, bumping against a pair of game-worn cleats that had been thrown in without any padding. The leather of the football already showed scuff marks from contact with the metal cleats. I spent the next 2 hours carefully photographing each item and documenting its condition. Collectibles this valuable required specific storage conditions: acid-free materials, climate control, protective displays, archival sleeves. My mother had treated them like old clothes heading to Goodwill. The damage was extensive: signatures smudged from improper handling, jerseys wrinkled from compression, cards bent from being stacked without protective sleeves. The authentication certificates, crucial for proving authenticity and value, were scattered throughout the boxes, many torn or damaged. "Mr. Chen, is there anything we can do?" Patricia asked, watching me document each piece of damage. "We feel terrible about this situation. It's not your fault. You were the victim of donation fraud, just like I was the victim of theft." I closed the last box, my hands shaking slightly from suppressed anger. "I'll need a written statement from you describing exactly how the donation was presented, what documentation was provided, and what representations my mother made about her ownership." "Of course. Anything you need. Should we be concerned about legal liability?" "Not if you cooperate fully with the investigation and provide documentation. Your victim's here too." The drive home with 23 boxes of my formerly pristine collection gave me time to think about what came next. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I'd made my decision about how to handle the situation. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, flour on her apron, classical music playing softly from the radio. She was making Dad's favorite cookies, looking domestic and innocent, the perfect picture of a caring wife and mother. "Back so soon. I thought you'd gone to work." "I went to the children's hospital." Her hands stilled on the mixing bowl. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did you want to see how grateful they were?" "To retrieve my stolen property." The wooden spoon clattered against the bowl. "Stolen." She forced a laugh, but her voice cracked slightly. "Don't be so dramatic, Marcus. I donated some old toys to charity. It was a good deed." "Mom, sit down." Something in my tone made her comply. She untied her apron with shaking hands and sat across from me at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. I opened my laptop and pulled up the insurance documentation I'd compiled over the years, screen after screen of professional appraisals, authentication certificates, purchase receipts, and photographs. These old toys were insured for $41,300. Every item was authenticated by professional third-party services, appraised by certified experts, and documented according to industry standards. I turned the screen toward her. "This is the police report I filed this afternoon for grand theft." Her face went white. All the blood drained from her cheeks, and she gripped the edge of the table. "Police report. The insurance company requires it for any theft claim over $10,000. They'll be conducting their own investigation, and the district attorney will determine whether to file criminal charges." "You can't be serious. I'm your mother." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos from a hospital storage room. "This is what your donation looked like when I found it. Priceless authenticated items thrown into grocery bags and cardboard boxes like garbage." She stared at the photos, and I watched her begin to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. A signed jersey that had been carefully preserved in museum-quality conditions, now wrinkled and damaged. Authentication certificates that had cost hundreds of dollars to obtain, now torn and water-stained. "The insurance adjuster will note every single piece of damage in his report," I continued, Professional restoration and re-authentication will cost thousands of dollars. That's in addition to the original theft. Mom's hands started shaking. I didn't know they were worth that much money. You didn't ask. You saw my belongings and decided they were yours to dispose of. But I'm your mother. I was trying to help sick children. Surely that counts for something. By stealing from your son and lying to a charity about ownership. I closed the laptop. The hospital is providing a full statement about how you presented the donation and what false claims you made about ownership. False claims? Her voice was barely a whisper. You told them you owned the items. You told them I had outgrown them and wanted them donated. You told them they were worth $500 when you knew I'd spent years collecting them. I leaned forward. Mom, what you did is a felony. Grand theft. Fraud. Possibly tax evasion if you tried to claim a deduction for property you didn't own. She started crying then. But I felt nothing. I'd spent too many years investigating cases exactly like this one. Family members who thought love gave them the right to dispose of valuable property. Insurance fraud disguised as generosity. The tears were always the same. I'll fix it, she sobbed. I'll call them and tell them I made a mistake. It's too late for that. The police report is filed. The insurance claim is active. The charity has documented everything and provided statements. The investigation is already underway. Dad appeared in the doorway, still moving slowly from his surgery, but drawn by the sound of Mom's crying. What's all the noise about? I handed him a copy of the police report. He read it slowly, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he read it again, as if hoping the words would change. Jesus Christ, Carol, $41,000. I didn't know, Mom whispered, mascara streaming down her cheeks. You didn't ask. Dad repeated my words, his voice heavy with disappointment. You went into his room and took his things without asking. How could you do that? I thought I was helping. The children's hospital needs money, and those things were just sitting there. Those things were his property, Dad said sharply. Property he brought here while taking care of me. Property he spent years collecting and thousands of dollars acquiring. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where I'd played as a child. The swing set was still there, rusty and unused. Dad had built it himself when I was 5, carefully following instructions and making sure every bolt was secure. He'd understood the value of taking care of things that mattered to people. You know what the worst part is? I said without turning around. This isn't the first time. Mom's crying stopped abruptly. Dad's chair creaked as he shifted. When I went to college, you threw away my comic book collection while I was gone. Said it was taking up too much space. When I moved out after graduation, you got rid of my baseball card collection. Said you needed the room for storage. Those were just worth about $1,500 total. Not enough for felony charges, but enough that I learned never to trust you with my belongings again. I turned back to face them. The only reason I brought my collection back here was because I thought 6 months of helping with Dad's care had earned me some basic respect for my property. We do respect you, Mom said desperately. No, you respect what I can do for you. My paycheck that's been covering your utilities. My insurance knowledge that saved you thousands on Dad's medical claims. My financial planning that organized your medications and appointments. I sat back down, feeling suddenly exhausted. But my actual interests, my hobbies, my property, those are just inconveniences you can dispose of when they're not useful to you. Dad set down the police report and rubbed his face with both hands. The motion reminded me of how much he aged since the surgery. Son, what happens now? The insurance company will pay me the full appraised value of the collection plus restoration costs. They'll then pursue criminal charges against Mom to recover their losses. The district attorney will decide whether to prosecute based on the strength of the evidence. And if they prosecute, grand theft in California is a felony, 1 to 3 years in state prison depending on the total value and circumstances, plus restitution, fines, and a permanent criminal record. Mom's crying turned into hyperventilating. She doubled over in her chair, gasping for air. Dad looked like he might need to go back to the hospital himself. There has to be something we can do, Dad said, his voice breaking. There is. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the restitution calculation I prepared. Mom can make full restitution immediately. $41,300 for the original collection value, plus estimated restoration costs of $8,000 for damaged items, plus the insurance deductible of $1,000, plus my legal fees. We don't have $50,000, Dad said flatly. Then you can take a loan against the house equity. The same house I've been paying the utilities for since I moved back in to help with your recovery. The room went silent except for Mom's labored breathing and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and fell quiet. You'd really send your own mother to prison? Mom whispered when she could finally speak. I'd really hold my own mother accountable for grand theft, I corrected. The same way I'd hold anyone else accountable who stole $40,000 from me. But I'm your mother. I raised you. I fed you and clothed you and I've spent the last 6 months feeding you, clothing Dad, and paying your bills while he recovered from surgery, I interrupted. Does that give me the right to steal from you? She had no answer for that. Dad rubbed his chest absently, a gesture he developed since the surgery when he was stressed. How long do we have to get the money? The insurance company will make their decision about criminal referral within 30 days. If Mom makes full restitution before then, including paying for all restoration costs, I can request they close the case without pursuing charges. And if we can't get the money in time, then you'll be dealing with detectives and prosecutors instead of insurance adjusters. And the restitution amount will be set by a judge, probably with additional penalties and fees. I stood up and closed my laptop. I'm going upstairs to pack. I'll be staying in a hotel until I can find a new apartment. You're leaving? Dad asked, and for the first time he sounded like the frail old man he was trying not to be. Dad, I can't live with people who consider my belongings disposable. I can't trust people who think a family relationship gives them the right to steal from me. But my recovery. You're doing well. Your medications are organized for the next month. Your follow-up appointments are scheduled. The insurance claims are filed. You don't need me here anymore. As I headed for the stairs, Mom called after me. Marcus, please. We can work this out. Family doesn't do this to each other. I stopped and turned back. You're right, Mom. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to charities. Family doesn't dispose of each other's property like garbage. I looked at both of them, sitting at the table where we'd shared so many meals and conversations over the years. Family asks permission before giving away things that don't belong to them. Upstairs, I packed my belongings methodically, the same way I'd learned to document insurance claims. Every item accounted for, every valuable piece carefully protected. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, I thought about the 8-year-old kid who'd gotten his first signed baseball. How proud I had been to show it to my parents, how carefully I'd explained the authentication process, the player's statistics, the historical significance of the moment. They'd never understood. To them, it was just a ball some guy had written on. But that 8-year-old had grown up to become an expert in the field his parents dismissed. I knew how authentication worked, how insurance coverage protected collectors, how theft investigations proceeded, how criminal prosecution moved through the system. Most importantly, I knew the difference between a toy and a valuable collectible, and I knew the difference between helping children and stealing from your own son. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia at the hospital. Mr. Chen, we've prepared a full incident report for the police and insurance investigators. Also wanted you to know, we're implementing new procedures for high-value donations to prevent this from happening to anyone else. Thank you for handling this so professionally. I smiled for the first time all day. At least some good would come from this mess. 2 weeks later, I was settling into my new apartment when Jessica called with an update. Marcus, your mother's attorney contacted us. They're arranging full restitution through a home equity loan. Good to hear. There's something else interesting. We've been investigating similar cases since yours came up, and it turns out donation fraud involving family members is more common than we thought. The company wants to hire you as a consultant to help develop prevention protocols and training materials. I looked around my new apartment where my restored collection was properly displayed in climate-controlled cases with museum-quality lighting and security systems. Every piece had been professionally restored and re-authenticated. The insurance settlement had covered everything, plus enough extra to upgrade my protection systems. I'd be very interested in that. Great. Oh, and Marcus, your mother called our fraud hotline yesterday. She wanted to report that someone had stolen $40,000 worth of sports memorabilia from her house. I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Let me guess. She couldn't provide any documentation of ownership, not a single receipt or photograph. Turns out she also couldn't explain why the items were listed on someone else's insurance policy or why the supposed theft occurred on the same day she donated items to charity. Some people never learn. The fraud investigator flagged it as a potential false report. She could face additional charges if she pursues it. After I hung up, I walked over to look at my restored collection. The Tommy Gwynn jersey hung in perfect condition, the signature clear and bold under UV protective glass. The authentication certificate, reprinted by PSA after the original was damaged, hung beside it in an acid-free frame. But I'd learned something important from this experience. The collection itself had never been the real treasure. The real treasure was understanding my own worth, knowing when to protect what mattered to me, and having the expertise to fight back when someone tried to take it. The 8-year-old with the signed baseball had grown up just fine. He just needed better security and clearer boundaries about what family really means. Some people collect sports memorabilia. I've learned to collect self-respect, and unlike my jerseys and baseballs, that was something no one could donate without my permission.